Today we're going to be talking about, do you know how much your lift truck fleet is really costing you? This is an important way to analyze your data on your lift truck fleet costs, which can be utilized to implement a strategic replace and rotation plan, provide you insight on an action plan to reduce those lift truck fleet costs, and to also help you more efficiently and effectively manage your fleet. My name is Lisette Bermudez, and I'm the manager in fleet management here at Associated, an integrated supply chain solutions company. And I have 10 years of experience in the supply chain industry with a financial industry background. I'm a graduate of Robert Morris University, and I currently oversee the management of several lift truck fleets for several clients in the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Here are a few questions that your company might be asking you. Are your fleet costs trending upwards? What are those top cost drivers? How much are you spending on avoidable damage or abuse? How do you take that information and implement an action plan to reduce lift truck expenses? And what is the equipment utilization for your lift truck fleet? Corporately, branch to branch, or maybe division to division. What is that cost per hour for that lift truck fleet? And again, corporately, department to department, or division to division. How to use that data analysis to put together and create a replace and rotation strategy for your lift truck fleet. Answers to these types of questions can help control your costs, help you implement procedures for impact and avoidable damage, and help to assist you in right-sizing your fleet, as well as putting together an action plan to optimize your lift truck fleet. Or if you're looking to outsource for a fleet management program, the program should be able to partner with you and provide answers to questions such as these, as well as assist in implementing cost savings recommendations and help you in putting together a strategic planning for rotating and replacing that fleet. However, before we go into that information, I wanted to take a look at what fleet management is not. Because in essence, when we're talking about anything that is tracking your lift truck costs to implement an action plan so that you can reduce or control those costs, that it really, in essence, is a fleet management program. Note that a fleet management program, or a true fleet management program, is not simply just report generation. An effective fleet management program uses the data that's collected from reporting, and this could be from either blended service providers or even in-house technicians, and analyzes that information. Two important factors when analyzing this information is maintenance costs and also your utilization. In addition to that, another important factor when looking at a true fleet management program is implementation. Using that information to help cost savings recommendations be put together to help control and reduce those costs, in addition to implementing procedures to optimize your fleet, and using all that information to put together a strategic plan to replace and rotate your fleet accordingly. So again, fleet management is more than just report generation. It has two important factors, analyzing and implementing. Now, with that being said, I'd like to commend you for attending today's webinar. And the reason for that is that in a DC Velocity Reader survey, they found that 75% of them were not using a fleet management program or were even tracking hours of use or even their fleet costs for each of their vehicles. Again, in an article by KTEC, it noted that 94% of its material handling end users did not know what their real maintenance costs were. And even more of them did not have any programs to help reduce those costs. So all this to say that if you're not tracking your costs on your vehicles or utilization, or have a fleet management program, you are not alone. But attending today's webinar is the step in the right direction. Now let's take one of those questions. Are your fleet costs trending upwards? Let's say in gathering all of the data from all of the different service providers, and let's say even our in-house technicians, we determined that one of our costs that's trending upwards is our electrical repairs. We're seeing a lot of work orders being noted for overcharging, lack of watering, bad cells being replaced, and different factors such as these. Some of the things you might want to ask yourself is, how old is my fleet? And if my fleet is aging, most likely your battery is aging as well. We know the life expectancy for a battery should be about 5 years, and that's in normal application environments. So again, those are some factors you want to look at by looking at such trends as these with electrical repairs being increased in your location. Now you're probably wondering, this is some great information, but what's next? How do I use this type of information to implement an action plan to help reduce my lift truck expenses. I can tell you that in looking at this for one of our clients, we helped them decrease in the first year of implementation of a battery maintenance program 17% of their battery charger repairs alone. So perhaps that's something to look at for your facility, to put together a battery charger maintenance program, or maybe to start looking at replacing some of those older batteries. Because again, you have the cost savings in having newer equipment or newer batteries for your equipment as well to help control and lower those electrical expenses. Now let's take a look at the second question that we've noted. What are my top cost drivers? So now let's say then looking at the data, we find out that the top two cost drivers in our facility are wheels and tires and scheduled maintenances. Now, one of the ways to help reduce your wheels and tires repairs, if you see that you're doing a lot of replacing of drive tires, load wheels, is to reach out to your local service provider to discuss possibly buying these in larger quantities. Again, that's going to help control your costs and keep it from increasing. So those are your what's next action steps when we're looking at the wheels and tires repairs. I can tell you that in implementing a wheel and tire program from one of our clients, we were able to save them tens of thousands of dollars in savings and decrease their cost by 35% just within the first years of implementation. What we've done is put together a wheel and tire program for our customer that let all of the service providers know that based on some wheel and tire tests that we've done at different locations for that customer, we found the best tire that had the longest life. Because again, the tire itself may have cost more. However, it is the savings on the labor end that is the most cost savings because you're not having a technician having to come out as often to replace those wheels and tires. In addition to that, you also have less downtime for that equipment. So the productivity in your facility is also affected. Now let's say one of the other cost drivers was, as I said earlier, scheduled maintenances. We all know one of the things that must be done to our equipment, just like we need to do oil changes on our cars. Well, what if instead of doing our scheduled maintenances in a frequency that was based only on calendar, we actually took the time to take the analysis from the data and we were able to adjust those and calculate what our utilization usage was based on what is actually happening with our equipment. You can then review that SM schedule you currently have and see if it's based on the utilization or just by calendar days, and you can give some recommendations on possibly having maybe those scheduled maintenances not performed as often based on your utilization. Perhaps you only need them done twice a year based on your utilization. You're going to have cost savings on having, again, your equipment not have to incur the expense of scheduled maintenances as often as they don't need, but also, again, look at the productivity because, again, you won't have as much downtime on that equipment as well. Now let's look on the other hand. What if you're looking at your utilization and usage and you find that your scheduled maintenances are not being performed enough and they're not catching those repairs in the early hours, which is what scheduled maintenance is supposed to assist in doing? Then it means time to talk to your service provider and adjust your scheduled maintenances so that they are keeping up with the needs of your equipment as your utilization dictates. So when you look at the data, you're seeing higher utilization and many costly repairs in between those scheduled maintenances. That will give you insight to making those type of adjustments. Again, having this information will empower you to be able to discuss with your local service provider how you need to make changes to help reduce or control your costs. Also note that if you do choose to implement a fleet management program with an outside source, that they should be able to monitor this for you, as well as be able to work with different service providers and also your in-house technicians as well to track and collect that data. Now let's take a look at how much are we spending on avoidable damage. Let's say that we're looking at the detailed description on our work orders and we find that, again, most of the wheel and tire repairs are being noted to be for flat spotting, which is normally associated with debris on the floor, or if we see chunking. Could that be due to some dock plates causing damage or bad flooring? Therefore, you're seeing these repairs escalating and you're seeing them noted as avoidable repair or customer damage. This may mean that you need to implement better housekeeping practices to assist in controlling those costs. Perhaps it means having them go through their checklist and making sure they're reporting any needed repair on wheels and tires at that time. So again, if we're looking at impact damage and you're noting that there's a lot of work orders coming through showing that there is impact damage, you want to note the first question you should be asking is, what is the operator hitting? Lift truck damage accounts for 90% of rack damage, and that's per an article in Material Handling Management. Again, not only addressing the cost and reduction of those costs, but also addressing those safety concerns in using the equipment improperly. So you want to make sure that you're looking at that information and using that information to possibly put some operator accountability, procedures or processes together. Perhaps it's time to look at assigning operators, if you don't already, to individual pieces of equipment. This way, noting when something happens, you'll know exactly who it is that you can follow up with. This will also assist in reducing those types of repairs. Now, if you do find that in looking at your data analysis, you find this to be a much larger issue and you're finding a lot of impact damage being noted, it may mean implementing some sort of impact management system to help control or reduce those costs. Now that you have the data showing what it is costing you in impact damage to your equipment, it will provide you, again, with information you can use to justify the purchase of such things as an impact management system to management or procurement. Some of the other things you might know when looking at avoidable damage or customer damage is you might find such things as perhaps a lot of loaded backrests being repaired. And you may find out later in looking further into the information and maybe following up with your service provider technician that the operators are using the backrest to pull product rather than using the equipment the way they should. Again, this is to highlight that perhaps it's time to do some operator retraining, or perhaps it's time to implement some kind of operator process and procedures and accountability. Please note as well, when looking at such things as avoidable damage and impact damage, that your operators should be retrained every 3 years per OSHA standards. In addition to that, if you do have any operator that is associated with an accident of any kind, OSHA mandates that they also be retrained on the piece of equipment when that occurs. So again, you just want to make sure that when you're looking at these type of expenses, that you're noting items that you might want to follow up with your operators, facility managers, or maintenance managers to help control or lower those costs. Now, let's say that upon looking at some of this information, you note that the technician is noting that there are a lot of control handles being broken. And they're noting this as an avoidable damage, but you're noticing that you're seeing this same type of repair across your fleet at all your locations. Then perhaps it's time to follow up with your service provider because maybe it's not an operator issue, but maybe it's a quality issue. Again, having this kind of information will give you the ability to see what it is that might be happening at those locations and follow up with your service provider to help control and lower those costs. Now, what if we were asking the question, what is the equipment utilization for my lift truck fleet? Some of the things to note is, are you keeping older, less efficient pieces of equipment that have maxed out their utilization hours instead of replacing them with newer, more efficient pieces of equipment? In looking at the utilization, let's say from your SMs, you can begin to use that same information on usage to determine what pieces of equipment are being underutilized and what equipment is being overutilized. Having that sort of information can assist with understanding what your needs are for your facility, as well as ensuring you have the right amount of the right type of equipment. Industry average is that most facilities have about 10 to 20% more equipment than what they need. So let's say if you're looking at right-sizing your fleet, you can actually take the data collected, look at the hours along with your analysis and calculations, and effectively determine whether you have too many pieces of equipment and where the equipment will best be utilized. For example, say that your usage on a newer reach truck is at optimal levels, but you have several older reach trucks that are barely being used 10 to 15 hours in a quarter. Perhaps it is time to begin phasing the underutilized reach trucks out and getting in the equipment you do need. Or what if you took a look at this by departments to evenly distribute your usage? This will also assist in controlling and lowering your costs, in addition to your productivity. Now, you might be saying, that's great, but in our facility, we don't own our equipment. We do short and long-term rentals. Again, how powerful do you think having this information would be? Would you be able to gather from this information whether you're renting too much equipment or the wrong type of equipment? How would having this information assist you in better management of your fleet on usage that may have overage fees included on your contract for those rentals? In looking at the data, you can determine by utilization calculations whether it is time to park a piece of equipment that is getting closer to those overage fees and have your operators utilize another underutilized piece of equipment. This will help you to avoid those added expenses due to those overage fees. Again, a lot can be derived from looking at your utilization of your fleet and using that to either evenly distribute your usage, right-size your fleet, or help control any of those overage fees, or not incur additional rental fees if they're not needed. Now that we've looked at what your total lift truck fleet is costing you and your utilization, this will help you now to answer the question, what is the cost per hour on my lift truck fleet? We can do a calculation that will determine what that piece of equipment's cost per hour is and do a comparison of one to another, department to department, or facility to facility. Or we can even look at what your corporate average is and see where each facility fits in when comparing it to the corporate average. Now, there are a few factors to take into account when you're looking at a thorough analysis of cost per hour. Some of the things to keep in mind is if you do see a higher cost per hour, you want to dig deeper. Because was there a large repair that possibly caused a spike of the cost per hour for that quarter or that month? When you remove this one outlier, does it then fall in line with corporately with what your cost per hour is across your fleet? In addition, always keep in mind as well, is it that your equipment is being underutilized? Again, if you have repairs being incurred on a piece of equipment that's being underutilized, you're going to see a higher cost per hour. This is, again, one of those outliers that could help you identify a piece of equipment that you might even want to park or move to a different department or facility where it will be utilized, or maybe it's time to rotate that piece of equipment out of your fleet. In addition to that, there's always going to be human error. You have a technician that's writing down a cost per hour, or you have someone at data entry entering that cost per hour. So you always have to make sure that you're looking at such things. If your cost per hour is all of a sudden $4,000 cost per hour, obviously there might be some kind of data integrity question there. Also keep in mind when you're looking at your average that it might be different than the industry average. I always get that question, what is the industry average? And how can I compare what my fleet or my location is in comparison to the industry average? When looking at that, please keep in mind industry average is looking at the average based on a normal 5-day work week, 8 hours per day. So if you have a facility that runs 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, or multiple shifts, then your average is going to be very different than what the industry average is. So it's better to look at your corporate averages and compare each location to those averages and look at your own fleet and your own cost per hour for your fleet rather than the industry average. Also, always keep in mind fluctuations in business needs. You may have several pieces of one type of equipment because years ago it was what was needed to meet your business needs. But now those needs might have changed, and you don't need as many pieces of equipment, or maybe pieces of that type of equipment. Perhaps now it's time to move into a different type of equipment. Again, just want to make sure that when you're looking at all this, you're also keeping in mind any changes to your fluctuation of your business needs. Other factors to consider when you're implementing a rotation replacement strategy. Always note that a large part of putting an effective replacement and rotation strategy together is an accurate equipment list, along with needed information, such as how much equipment you have on hand at each of your locations, the type of equipment you have, the age of that fleet, and what does that mean for the age of your batteries as well. If you remember in an earlier slide, we talked about electrical costs. That's why it's important to know the age of your batteries as well. And also, if you have your total cost spent on that piece of equipment, this will help to ensure that you have a procedure in place to stop just repairing and fixing versus optimizing and replacing your forklift fleet. Now, let's look at additional cost savings when you're right-sizing your lift truck fleet. In discussing right-sizing the equipment, it means we also would decrease the amount of equipment, which inevitably is a natural progression that it means decreasing your labor costs. Per an article by ID Systems, it noted that typically the highest paid hourly employees are forklift operators in the supply chain industry. And this is when you're taking into account benefits, bonus, overtime, and also if you're hiring temporary staff. And if you have a facility that runs more than one shift, that cost is even higher. In right-sizing your fleet, inevitably, as we stated earlier, most industry average is that most facilities have 10 to 20% more equipment. It could mean a decrease in your labor costs by reallocating that labor to maybe another facility or another department. It may mean not hiring temp staff that you thought you needed that you now don't need, or maybe even a reduction in your costs for recruitment and hiring for the upcoming year, or a decrease in your labor costs at your existing facility. Again, we know that labor accounts for 72% of our costs in supply chain as noted on the pyramid. Now, also don't undermine some other factors when right-sizing your fleet, such as your energy as well. There's going to be a decrease in energy as you decrease your fleet and right-size your fleet as well. Not to mention we're going to affect that maintenance and repair portion, and also you may not be purchasing as many pieces of equipment as you thought you needed. So again, in right-sizing your fleet, inevitably you're touching almost every factor that you see on this pyramid here. What savings do you think you could benefit from either reallocating or adjusting your labor needs to be more efficient and productive? Because if we, again, note that industry average is 10 to 20% more equipment, taking into account a facility that had about 25 trucks, that would be about 2 to 5 trucks that most likely are not being utilized and could be rotated out of the fleet, which in essence also means 2 to 5 operators that you could reallocate. Again, powerful information to have to help you reduce, control, and right-size your fleet. Now that you're armed with this information and knowledge, you can do the following. Use this information to optimize your lift truck fleet by formulating a rotation strategy. And again, this could mean rotation of either equipment that's not needed and rotating that piece of equipment out of your fleet entirely, or it could just mean to evenly distribute your fleet and rotate it from one location to another or one department to another. This also means you now can put together a strategy for new equipment purchases. And this is going to be based on key factors. So now it's not a guessing game. You have data that will prove what you need and where you need it. Utilizing this data to implement cost savings recommendations. Again, such things as we mentioned earlier. Knowing your wheel and tire costs are a higher expense will help you to go to your service provider and work with them to implement some cost savings recommendations, such as maybe bulk purchases of those wheels and tires, or maybe putting together a wheel and tire program and testing which one will work best at your facilities. In addition to right-sizing the fleet, assist in reducing your maintenance and labor costs. So again, lots of what we talked about on that pyramid earlier. It's an inevitable natural progression that as you right-size your fleet, it also is going to help to decrease your labor costs. In addition, using this data to validate purchases to procurement and upper management. In an article, e-weekly article, an IBM Institute of Business conducted a survey and found that it showed that high-performing procurement organizations are deploying advanced data-driven tools to make informed procurement decisions. So again, having this information will allow you and give you the ability to have the data to back up any purchases, such as if you have a lot of impact or damage in your location, to possibly purchase an impact system, or to also help and give all the information you need to validate any purchases for newer equipment or newer batteries based on real data.